Let me tell you something that genuinely surprised me when I started researching this video. I went in expecting to debunk the Bermuda Triangle. Classic skeptic move, right? Pull back the curtain, show you the boring weather data, tell you the aliens aren't real, wrap it up in 15 minutes. Done. But that's not what happened. Because the more I dug, the naval archives, the oceanography journals, the declassified incident reports, the cognitive science literature, the more I realized something that nobody in the debunking space talks about. The Bermuda Triangle mystery isn't really about the ocean at all. It's about your brain. Specifically, it's about why human beings are wired, not just culturally conditioned, but neurologically hardwired to take a patch of ocean, stitch together unrelated tragedies across decades, and turn them into a single living monster. And understanding that process will change how you think about every conspiracy theory, every urban legend, and every piece of breaking news you consume for the rest of your life. So yes, we're going to talk about Flight 19, we're going to talk about the USS Cyclops, rogue waves, the Gulf Stream, methane bubbles, and all the greatest hits. But we're going to do something most Bermuda Triangle videos never do. We're going to ask the question that actually matters. Not what disappears in the Bermuda Triangle, but why we need it to be mysterious, even when we know better. Stay with me. This is going to go places you didn't expect. Let's start with something that sounds like a small detail, but is actually enormous. The Bermuda Triangle has no official borders, none. There is no international body, no government agency, no maritime authority that has ever drawn a legal or scientific boundary around it. The version with Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico as the three corners, the one you've seen on documentaries your whole life, came primarily from a 1974 book called The Bermuda Triangle by Charles Berlitz. Before that, a writer named Vincent Gaddis coined the term in a 1964 magazine article. The shape has changed depending on who's writing the chapter. Some versions include the Azores. Some stretch all the way down toward Cuba. Some are barely bigger than a few hundred miles across, and some swallow nearly 500,000 square miles of ocean. This matters enormously, and here's why. When researchers have gone back and plotted the actual coordinates of the incidents that supposedly happened inside the triangle, a significant number of them occurred outside any reasonable definition of its borders. Ships and planes that disappeared in the mid-Atlantic, near the coast of Portugal, in the Caribbean far south of Puerto Rico, these get quietly absorbed into the triangle mythology because they fit the emotional narrative, not the geography. And yet, the triangle feels completely real to most people. You could describe its shape to a stranger on the street, and they'd nod like they were recalling a fact from school. That's not an accident. That's the first glimpse of what this video is really about. How a story, told with enough confidence and repetition, begins to feel like cartography. Now, within whatever borders you choose to draw, the region is genuinely busy. This is one of the most heavily trafficked stretches of ocean on the planet. Cargo ships, cruise liners, private yachts, military vessels, commercial flights, private aircraft. The volume of traffic through this part of the Atlantic is staggering. And that matters because it's the foundation of a statistical illusion we'll come back to. More traffic means more incidents, full stop. Not more mysterious incidents, just more incidents. But before we get into the psychology, let's give the legend its due, because some of the cases that built the triangle's reputation are genuinely haunting, and understanding them in full detail reveals something important about both the ocean and about us. If the Bermuda Triangle has a founding myth, it's Flight 19. And most versions of the story you've heard leave out the details that make it simultaneously more understandable and more heartbreaking. December 5, 1945. Naval Air Station, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's a Tuesday afternoon, overcast but flyable. 5 Avenger torpedo bombers take off on a routine training exercise designated Navigation Problem Number 1, or as the Navy called it, a nav hop. The mission profile is simple by military standards. Fly east, drop practice bombs at a target called Hen and Chickens Shoals, turn north, fly further, then turn southwest and return to base. A triangle-shaped route over open water. Total flight time expected, about 2 hours. The flight leader is Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, a seasoned pilot with over 2,500 hours of flight time. This is not a rookie. The 14 other men with him are students, but that kind of training exercise in that kind of aircraft in those conditions is not considered particularly dangerous. What happened next unfolded slowly, then catastrophically. Roughly 90 minutes into the mission, a pilot from another flight, FT-74, flying separately, picks up radio transmissions from Taylor's group, and what he hears is already alarming. Taylor is expressing uncertainty about his position. He believes his compasses are malfunctioning, both of them simultaneously. He thinks the flight has passed over the Florida Keys, which would put them southwest of Fort Lauderdale, heading out toward the Gulf of Mexico. He wants to fly northeast to find land. The problem, the terrible, fatal problem, is that Taylor was almost certainly wrong about where he was. Most investigators now believe the flight had actually gone east and was somewhere over the Atlantic, north or northeast of the Bahamas. If Taylor flew northeast from there, believing he was over the Gulf and heading toward Florida, he was actually flying further out to sea. Radio communications were fragmentary and increasingly garbled as the afternoon wore on and weather deteriorated. At one point, another officer attempted to take over navigation by compass because his compasses were still working, and there's evidence Taylor overrode him, insisting on his own read of the situation. The sun was setting, fuel was running low, the ocean surface was growing rough. At 5:50 p.m., Taylor made a decision. He ordered the flight to fly east until they either found land or ran out of fuel, at which point they would ditch together in formation and wait for rescue. At 6:04 p.m., the last transmission was received. It was Taylor's voice, giving a routine compass heading. Then, silence. The Navy launched one of the largest peacetime searches in its history. Hundreds of planes and ships combed the Atlantic, and then, within half an hour of beginning the search, a Navy Mariner boat flyboat, one of the rescue aircraft, sent a brief radio transmission and also vanished. A merchant ship in the area later reported seeing an explosion in the sky and finding oil slicks in the water. The Mariner almost certainly exploded mid-air. These aircraft had a documented history of fuel vapor explosions, and they carried no flight recorder. It was not a supernatural disappearance. It was a tragedy that happened to occur during another tragedy. No trace of the 5 Avengers or their 14 crew members was ever conclusively found. Now, here's what that story actually tells us, if we're being honest with ourselves. It tells us about spatial disorientation, a phenomenon where a pilot's inner sense of position becomes completely divorced from reality. It tells us about the danger of fixation, where a skilled person becomes so locked onto a wrong mental model that they can't update even with contradicting evidence. It tells us that 2 compass failures on the same aircraft is unusual but not impossible, especially on aircraft that had undergone maintenance. It tells us that the Atlantic at dusk in December is an unforgiving search environment. And it tells us that 14 men and 1 experienced pilot flew into the dark Atlantic and died. And that's genuinely terrible, and it deserves more than being reduced to a ghost story. But the ghost story is what survived, because ghost stories are what we remember. To understand how the Bermuda Triangle legend works, you need to understand something most people never think about. The ocean is extraordinarily good at destroying evidence. Not in a conspiratorial way, in a purely physical, thermodynamic, biological, and hydrodynamic way. The ocean doesn't hide things on purpose. It just happens to be the most efficient evidence elimination system on Earth, and the triangle sits in one of the most energetic and current-driven portions of it. Start with the Gulf Stream. This is a genuine force of nature that most people dramatically underestimate. The Gulf Stream is essentially a river flowing inside the ocean, warm water moving northward at speeds of up to 5 miles per hour in some areas, carrying more water than every river on Earth combined. It flows directly through the Bermuda Triangle region. If a ship sinks in or near that current, anything that floats, life preservers, debris, wooden fittings, clothing, documents, get swept northward immediately. Within 24 hours, evidence can be 50 or 60 miles from the sinking location. Within a week, it's hundreds of miles away, or sunk or broken down by salt water and UV exposure. Aircraft wreckage presents a different problem. When a plane hits the ocean, especially under any kind of speed or structural stress, it doesn't sink as a unit. It explodes across a debris field. Metal fatigue, fuel ignition, water impact forces. These scatter a plane across miles of ocean surface in seconds. And then the Gulf Stream begins moving each piece individually. Fuel burns off, lighter materials sink, heavier materials sink faster. In deep water, and parts of the triangle sit over some of the deepest water in the Atlantic, pieces that reach the bottom may land in trenches so remote they've never been surveyed. Then there's biological degradation. In warm Atlantic water, organic material breaks down remarkably quickly. A human body in open, warm salt water under normal conditions may show little surface evidence of its existence within days. Wood deteriorates, rubber disintegrates, even aluminum corrodes with time. Now add weather. Sudden Atlantic storms, and the region is genuinely prone to rapid weather development, especially in summer and fall, can make air search impossible within hours of an incident. Surface search vessels in high seas lose sight of debris that might be visible from a calm day helicopter. By the time conditions improve, the window has closed. All of this creates a real phenomenon that has nothing to do with the paranormal. It creates incidents where things disappear without obvious wreckage, without distress calls if the event was sudden, and without survivors to explain what happened. And when that pattern repeats over decades in a region with high traffic, the pattern starts to look like intention. It starts to look like the ocean is choosing. Rogue waves deserve particular attention here because they represent a genuinely terrifying and historically underappreciated hazard. For most of the 20th century, oceanographers treated the idea of truly massive, spontaneous waves, walls of water rising to 60 or even 90 feet seemingly from nowhere, as maritime folklore. Sailors described them, old logs recorded them, and scientists largely dismissed them. Then in 1995, a drilling platform in the North Sea recorded a rogue wave over 80 feet tall in conditions that shouldn't have produced it. Satellite data collected in the early 2000s confirmed that rogue waves occur far more frequently than theoretical models had predicted. A rogue wave of significant height hitting a vessel broadside doesn't give the crew time to send a distress signal. The ship doesn't list slowly and allow lifeboats to deploy. It can capsize or break apart within seconds. And in an area where multiple Atlantic storm systems generate converging wave trains, exactly the kind of energy overlap that produces rogue waves, the probability, while still low in absolute terms, is higher than it would be in calmer seas. The Bermuda Triangle region, with its intersection of Gulf Stream currents, storm-generated swells, and deep water geography, is not an unreasonable place for such events. This doesn't explain everything attributed to the triangle, but it explains some of it, in a way that's both scientifically grounded and, frankly, more frightening than aliens. Now we get to the part I promised you at the beginning, the part that actually changes how you see the world. Why does the Bermuda Triangle endure as a cultural phenomenon when the evidence for anything truly anomalous is so thin? The answer lives in the architecture of human cognition, and it's worth understanding in detail because the same machinery that built the Bermuda Triangle legend is operating in your brain right now, shaping how you understand everything from current events to your own personal history. The first mechanism is called apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in unconnected information. The human brain is a pattern recognition system of extraordinary sophistication. It evolved in an environment where failing to notice patterns was often fatal. The rustle in the grass that turned out to be a predator killed you. The rustle that turned out to be wind cost you nothing but a racing heart. So the brain developed a strong bias toward pattern detection, even at the cost of generating false positives constantly. Researchers in cognitive psychology have shown that people will perceive patterns in purely random sequences, seeing faces in static, hearing words in white noise, and yes, connecting unrelated maritime disasters into a single narrative entity called the Bermuda Triangle. The second mechanism is the availability heuristic, identified by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in their foundational work on cognitive biases. We judge the probability of events based on how easily examples come to mind. Bermuda Triangle disappearances are dramatic, well-publicized, and repeated constantly through documentaries, books, and now YouTube videos. They're highly available in memory. Meanwhile, the thousands of ships and planes that pass through that same region without incident leave no memorable trace, because nothing happening is not a story. So the ratio of tragedies to safe passages that we carry in our heads is wildly distorted from the actual ratio. The third mechanism is something called mystery premium, a term used in narrative psychology to describe how unresolved stories activate the brain's reward circuitry differently than resolved ones. We experience a kind of cognitive discomfort when patterns are incomplete, when questions go unanswered, when the ending is missing. And we're motivated to fill those gaps. Stories with clean explanations satisfy us briefly and then fade. Stories that remain genuinely ambiguous, where the wreckage was never found, where the last transmission cut off before the crucial sentence, where the investigation concluded only cause unknown, those stories stay active in the mind. They recirculate. They get told again. The fourth and perhaps most important mechanism is what researchers call the curse of knowledge working in reverse. Once we know that a place has a reputation, we unconsciously collect evidence that confirms it and discount evidence that doesn't. This is classic confirmation bias with a geographic twist. If a ship runs aground on a reef in the North Atlantic, it's a shipping accident. If a ship runs aground on a reef inside the imaginary borders of the Bermuda Triangle, it's a triangle incident. Same event, different narrative weight because of the label. Charles Berlitz's book of 1974, which did more than almost any other single source to cement the triangle in popular consciousness, was later subjected to serious critical analysis by researcher Lawrence David Couchet, who went back to original records, Coast Guard reports, newspaper archives, Lloyd's of London filings, Navy incident logs, and found numerous incidents Berlitz described had occurred outside the Triangle's borders, or in terrible weather that Berlitz had described as calm, or had been located and explained after Berlitz implied they remained missing, or in some cases appeared to have been significantly embellished or invented. Couchet's book argued that the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle was itself a manufactured mystery, the result of research that was done sloppily combined with sensational presentation. Berlitz's book sold millions of copies. Couchet's correction sold a fraction of that. Because debunking doesn't get to borrow the mystery premium. It only works for people who are actively looking for it. There's something important that gets lost when we reduce every ocean disaster to either paranormal mystery or boring weather event. And I want to make sure we don't leave without acknowledging it. The ocean is the single largest and most hostile environment on Earth. It covers 70% of the planet's surface. Its average depth is over 12,000 feet. Its deepest point is nearly 7 miles down. It generates weather systems powerful enough to reshape coastlines. It contains currents that move with the force of rivers multiplied thousands of times. Its surface can transform from glass calm to ship killing in under an hour. And for most of human history, venturing onto it required accepting a genuine probability that you would not return. The mariners and aviators whose stories get absorbed into Bermuda Triangle mythology were not victims of something supernatural. They were human beings operating at the edge of what technology and human capability could handle at the time, in an environment that remains one of the most demanding on Earth even now. Flight 19's crew were not undone by a dimensional rift. They were undone by disorientation, communication failures, deteriorating weather, and the merciless arithmetic of fuel consumption over open water. The crew of the USS Cyclops, which vanished in 1918 with 309 people aboard, one of the largest non-combat naval losses in American history, was almost certainly undone by structural failure, severe weather, or some combination of both, in an era when overloaded cargo vessels in Atlantic conditions were not unusual tragedies. These people deserve to have their stories told accurately. Not because accuracy is more important than mystery, but because the actual truth of what the ocean can do to human beings, what weather and geography and the limits of technology can do, is itself a story worth telling. It's not less compelling than Aliens. In some ways, it's more compelling because it's real and because it happened to real people who had families waiting for them on shore. The Bermuda Triangle, in its debunked form, is actually a tribute to the ocean's genuine power, a power so extreme that when it claimed lives, people needed a supernatural explanation to make sense of it. That's not stupidity, that's a very human response to a genuinely inhuman scale of force. So here's where we land. The Bermuda Triangle, as a paranormal phenomenon with a special power to consume ships and aircraft, almost certainly does not exist. The statistics don't support it. The physical geography explains the disappearances that are real. The incidents that seem most inexplicable are either misreported, mislocated, or products of the ocean's extraordinary efficiency at destroying evidence. But the Bermuda Triangle as a cultural artifact, as a monument to pattern recognition, to the human need for narrative, to the way a label transforms random tragedy into structured myth, that is absolutely real, and it is absolutely fascinating. And here's what I want you to carry out of this video. Every time you encounter a mystery, whether it's a conspiracy theory, a news story that doesn't quite add up, a pattern you've noticed that feels too meaningful to be coincidental, ask yourself which cognitive mechanisms are running in the background. Ask whether you're experiencing a mystery premium. Ask whether the availability heuristic is distorting your sense of frequency. Ask whether confirmation bias is making you collect evidence that fits and ignore evidence that doesn't. Because the Bermuda Triangle isn't just a patch of Atlantic Ocean, it's a mirror. And what it reflects, if you look carefully, is exactly how your mind builds reality out of incomplete information. The ocean keeps its secrets. The question is whether you keep yours.